Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you please take your seats? It's 9:30, so welcome to the San Diego School of Christian Studies. I'm Kay Gilbert, and I apologize. Some of the coffee is not working, and I don't know what to do about it. I set it up, I plugged it in, and then there's electrical difficulties back there. So we do have people working on it. I apologize for that. We welcome those of you who are present in Linder Hall, and for those joining us online, streaming the presentation. The San Diego School of Christian Studies addresses matters of spiritual concern to all people. Our purpose is to create meaningful educational opportunities and experiences of intellectual rigor, challenging adults and youth to deepen their faith and broaden their knowledge. Embracing unity in diversity, the School of Christian Studies has congregants in our planning council from the First United Methodist Church here and from St. Paul's United Methodist Church, and we are proud to be working to make this happen. We are sponsoring speakers to address matters of spiritual concern having to do this season with the environment. Now, a bit about our order of business. Our lecture today is entitled Nature as Neighbor, Expanding Our Sense of Sacred Community. And I'll be introducing that a bit later. The lecture will be followed by discussion. Please save your questions until the end of the lecture. If you'll note on your table, there are note cards there. Please write your questions on the note cards. We'll collect them at the end of the lecture, and we'll be able to ask those of our speaker. While questions are being asked and answered, we will pass the hat. Literally. Show them the hat, Limby. We depend on donations and sponsorships. We're not a line item in the church budget. We pass the hat for that, for donations. We strongly also encourage sponsorships. We have suggestions of several levels, but we'll take any amount you want to sponsor. And we'll be proud to have it. If you have any questions about how to be a sponsor, let me know afterwards, and I'll be happy to give you that information. Now, you also have on your table, in colored papers, evaluation forms. Our evaluation sheets will be collected after this is all done. You see the colored papers on your table? We'll collect those, just leave them on the table, and we'll collect them all after you fill those out. It gives us good feedback, and we appreciate it.
It's very important for us to get your feedback on those evaluations. We use it to help plan the future. And for the questions, there's cards on your table. If you need pens, I have pens you can use.
Okay, after lecture, we'll have a light lunch and an opportunity then for you to come back to the tables and discuss what we did today, meet a new friend, and have a good time. So, introducing our topic today. The school began this year with the theme of loving God's environmental creations. The School of Christian Studies will focus on that general theme in multiple presentations throughout the rest of this year, 5 in total, the last one in April of 2025. In our spiritual tradition, the Christian tradition, there are at least 4 primary principles for why we are to take care of the environment. Okay, principle number 1, stewardship. It involves taking care of the resources that have been entrusted to us by God. This includes the earth and all of its natural systems. Genesis 2:15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it." You can't get more plain than that. Principle number 2, creation care. In Genesis 1:31, God created the earth and declared it to be good. Caring for the environment is seen as an act of reverence and gratitude towards God for his creation. Earth is our beautiful home. We are to enjoy it, but we're also responsible and accountable to it. Principle number 3, love for your neighbor. In Matthew 22, Jesus taught the importance of loving one's neighbor as oneself. Caring for the environment is an expression of our love for our neighbors, especially, and not only ourselves, but for future generations. Environmental degradation can disproportionately harm marginalized communities, and we have an obligation to them as well. We have a duty and a responsibility. Principle number 4, justice and compassion. The Bible often speaks about justice and compassion for the poor and the oppressed. Environmental degradation can have severe impacts on those living in poverty, hunger, or displacement. Earth is our only Eden that we know of in the cosmos. In short, our Christian tradition sees environmental care as a way of honoring God's creation, exercising stewardship, showing love to others, and participating in God's restorative plan. And now our lecture. As I said, the title of our lecture is Nature as Neighbor, Expanding Our Sense of Sacred Community. We are thrilled to welcome again Professor Peter Bolin. Peter is chair of the Department of Philosophy and Humanities at Southwestern College, where he teaches world religions, Asian philosophy, world mythology, and ethics. He's an author of the book, The 7-Stone Path, An Everyday Journey to Wisdom. He has a few on the table here, if you just might want to come by. I have a copy. I loved it. Okay, he also has been here a number of times. He teaches all over the county. It's wonderful. Maybe all over the world. I don't know. Anyway, welcome, Professor Bolin.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much for that very gracious and generous and kind introduction. Thank you to First United Methodist Church and St. Paul's United Methodist, and especially the School of Christian Studies, whose work is so generative and transformative, and it's the best kept secret in San Diego. And y'all need a well-funded marketing department to spread the amazing work that you do. I don't think a lot of people know about it who would really love to know about it. And so whatever scale this work takes is just a wonderful improvement on the quality of life in our community. So yeah, I am a professor at a community college where I mostly teach comparative religion. And so I'm here to share with you some thoughts, as I have the previous two. I guess this is my third time here, and the theme, thank you. Yeah, isn't that great? I don't know. I'm very humbled and honored by that. But each time, you know, the conversation starts in some emails, like in the early spring. Hey, Peter, here's what we're doing this year. Here's what we'd like you to maybe think about as a possible offering. This is kind of a commissioned talk, you know, in a sense. We're co-creating this together. This is the inquiry that y'all are in this year. I almost said this semester, and that's kind of what it is. This 2 semesters. We're in the fall semester, and the next, I've spoken about this great parable of Jesus that you referenced in your introduction about this question that the Pharisee asks Jesus, who is my neighbor? And that's where our work begins. It's a really potent question. Jesus, of course, doesn't answer the question. He says, he tells a story. He tells a parable. Oh, let me tell you a little story that I just made up about this, about the guy walking and getting beaten and the Good Samaritan, right? We all know that one cold. So this ethic of taking care of your neighbor. And this year, of course, we're expanding that into thinking about the cosmos, or at least the planet as a whole. So nature as a neighbor. Not only as a fledgling poet do I love alliteration, but I really think that phrase kind of has as potency for us. If we expand Jesus' teachings about how we are to treat one another as human beings, why not add animals and plants and the entire biosphere in which human beings exist? So as you laid out already in your intro, there doesn't seem to be a demarcation point between where our relationship ends and our relationship with our interrelationship with the entire cosmos begins. And ever since, I was in junior high, when I grew up in Ventura, when that big oil spill happened, all those derricks, and then Earth Day was invented, and now we have Earth Day, and the environmental movement started referring to the planet Earth as Gaia, pulling this old Greek idea out and thinking about the planet as a single organism. Political borders matter at the sociological level. But from Earth, of course, we've all seen those wonderful photos that Neil Armstrong took from the moon. No borders are visible, no nations are visible, no religions are visible. It's just this beautiful blue jewel hanging in the sky that we all literally share physiologically and psychologically and spiritually. So I'm thinking about my favorite Jewish mystic, political activist, professor, philosopher, rabbi, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched with Martin Luther King. And this line crossed my path a few months ago, and I kind of held on to it. It said something important to me about religion in general. That religion, he says, begins with a consciousness that something is asked of us. And I find that such a rich antidote to the more individualistic, kind of born-again Christianity that I found so, frankly, extended, that I found so repellent as a teenager. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. My parents were from Holland. The sort of secular people, really great people, really decent people. I think I was raised pretty good. But I never went to church as a kid, and I came to Christianity much later, sort of through my academic studies. And so when I read things like this, I'm really caught by this energy of, here's what really makes religion matter, is that it is a calling. It's not a gift for me so I get to have eternal life and I get to live in this beautiful heaven, all that I, me, and mine talk. It's something more collective, and wouldn't that square coming from Jewish consciousness, where there is just more energy about tribal salvation and much less energy about individual salvation. So I'm thinking about calling, and then this John Muir line pops into my head: the mountains are calling and I must go. And being kind of a secular kid before I became a religious studies major and learned about all these wonderful world religions and fell in love with all of it, and even was baptized as a Christian about 4 years ago. My friends are all shocked about that. But I'm not here to talk about my own spiritual autobiography, as compelling as it may be. But y'all have your own story. Some of you are cradle Methodists. Some of you came to it escaping other places. Sort of like, don't churches sometimes feel like refugee centers? We all kind of left other organizations that stopped working for us. Incidentally, my wife Lori and I just got back from Yosemite Wednesday night. We were up there for 6 days. A lot of you will recognize exactly this photo. And the photographers who go to Yosemite a lot know this exact pullout. I hit it every time I'm up there at the end of the day when the light is really bathing El Capitan on the left, and on the right you can just see the little bit of the top of Bridal Veil Falls, and that's of course the Merced river flowing through Yosemite Valley. More on Yosemite later, but that idea, and John Muir is a perfect kind of lightning rod for that. You know, he's a Scottish kid. His father and mother immigrated to America, and he left a kind of very formal religious upbringing and disappeared into the mountains. And so when you read John Muir, especially about his love of the Sierras, you really get the feeling that this is nature theology. He's writing about the wilderness as a spiritual experience all the time. And of course, he was instrumental in the founding of the Sierra Club. So all these threads are kind of weaving together for me. It was easy for me to fall in love with the Sierra Nevada mountains, but the God word was a little off-putting to me until much later. So here's what I think is at stake, and this is part of the description of today's inquiry that I want to invite you into. If the core of the Christian message is radical care for all who suffer and not merely personal salvation, as I referenced a moment ago, then what happens when we expand the meaning of neighbor to include all of creation, the plants and animals and the biosphere that supports them? And in the face, of course, of our current climate crisis, we're challenged more urgently than ever. Do our religious ideologies draw our attention to the hereafter or to the here and now? And I find that among my young students at Southwestern College, when we talk about our own religious paths, many of them frame their Christianity at a very elemental level. I don't want to go to hell. I'm afraid of hell. And so they have entered into a Christian experience that a lot of us probably wouldn't feel real great about or even recognize. That it's a kind of cosmic blackmail system. I will beat the crap out of you if you don't worship me, which is a weird way to portray God, in my opinion. And yet many people, I suspect outside this room and far away from this Zoom presentation, still hold that general idea that, you know, that Pascal's wager idea. Well, there may or may not be a God, but I'm going to be a believer because, you know, I don't want to burn in hell. And if it turns out after I die there's no God or heaven and hell, what have I really lost? I got to hang out with some nice people, sing on Sunday, eat some cake. Sometimes there's coffee. I don't know what happened with that, but, you know, so what do you really lose being a Christian, which seems like the weirdest way to enter into spiritual life. Like it's essentially a kind of self-interest thing. And I want to think with you about maybe an expanded sense of even being Christian, that it isn't about what's in it for me, as Confucius asks. The inferior person asks, what's in it for me? A superior person asks, what is the right thing to do? So from the ancient Chinese philosopher Confucius, we get a pretty pointed binary there about what motivates us. So how might Christianity contribute to the crucial work of natural restoration? By the way, I'm not going to answer that question today, but I need that question to be in the room so that we enter into and live in the question. I'm not the answer guy. I'm a philosophy professor. I ask questions, and they pay me. It's so cool. So finally, as we set up today's work, what good is caring for others if we do not also care for the world that sustains all lives? So I guess the thesis of not only my work today, but perhaps of this whole fall and spring semester is that question. How in the heck is taking care of your neighbor not immediately also at the same time taking care of the world? Because guess what? And you hinted at this in your introduction, Kay, that if you don't take care of the environment, your neighbors are going to suffer. Maybe not me in my middle class life in my nice air-conditioned home, because I have solar panels on the roof. I was able to afford that. I can run the AC all year if the planet heats up a lot. But for folks who don't have that kind of access, this is a serious issue. So I'm going to take you all kinds of places. You should have worn those neck braces. There might be some whiplash as we go this way and that way. But I want to invite you into an inquiry. And being the comparative religion guy, and I'm interested in history, and I want to look across the spectrum of all these things. But it seems to me that over the course of our entire human journey, we've spent 99% of, and I didn't actually do the math on that. That's a hyperbolic number there, but I bet it's pretty close. We've spent about 99% of our time outdoors, in the rain, in the wind, under the trees, and beneath a blanket of stars. Depending on where you start the clock, right? We think Homo sapiens walked out of Africa about 150,000 years ago, and various hominid species existed for 1.5 million maybe before that. So I don't know where you want to start the timeline, but we invented electricity like a minute ago. And then we all moved indoors and never saw the stars again. And I was in Yosemite, as I said, and to be in Yosemite Valley at night in winter when the sun goes down early, or in fall when the sun goes down early, the stars are thick, and the Milky Way runs right across the middle of the valley. And up on El Capitan, you see 30, 40 lights of all the all the climbers that are bivouacking up there. This is a surreal experience. It was just jaw-dropping. So our first spiritual experience, as I'm arguing, were in nature. As humanity developed, it was under the stars that we first began to understand some kind of primordial spiritual relationship to the cosmos. Religion came much, much later. If by religion you mean organized conceptual systems with prescribed rituals, specific doctrines and texts, but if you mean the root meaning of religion, from the Greek and then Latin, religio and redigare, you get a very different narrative, because what religion really primally means is to link back, to join together. In fact, you hear in those Greek and Latin words the word ligament. And ligament, for you human anatomy people, are those hard cords that tie your muscles to your bones. There's a lot of skeletons in my neighborhood because it's Halloween soon. And they're getting bigger every year. Pretty sure Halloween is an adult holiday now. I think y'all just took over with your giant inflatables and your huge skulls and skeletons. So what ties the meat to the bones? It's ligaments, right? It's really crucial tissue. So think about religion as that set of stories and narratives and rituals and community and scripture and thinking and feeling and song and coffee sometimes, and all of that stuff is religion. And religion binds us to one another at its best. It binds us to the mystery that we come from and are continually unified with. And religion connects us to ourselves. So I often think of religion that way. That's what draws us into faith communities, spiritual communities, sanghas, satsangs, mosques, and monasteries, and churches, and synagogues, and temples, and ashrams, and Wiccan circles under the moonlight, and smoke houses on the reservation. So this is the longing that brings us through the door of places like this. We just are tired of isolation, of alienation, of disconnection, of confusion. We want to come into a place where we can viscerally experience love and connection and meaning and truth. And none of it makes any sense up here, but boy, you experience it here. And so religious systems, Joseph Campbell argues, all of them are penultimate stages. That's a good crossword puzzle word. It means the second to the last, right? Ultimate means the last. So penultimate is the second to the last. So our religious expressions, all of them, get us to the second to the last step. And then the ultimate step, or the final stage, is that experience of reunification, the realization of oneness beyond the categories of understanding, beyond doctrine, beyond language and concepts. It is fundamentally ineffable. That is to say, it cannot be conceptualized. It cannot be spoken. We have, in this tradition here, we have the mystery of Christ. This completely trans-rational claim that the cosmic mystery and sacred source of the universe that we call God the Father in this tradition decided to become animal, to become man, and walk among us and sweat and bleed and suffer. What an incredible narrative of great power, of course, for billions of Christians, and also utterly confusingly weird to atheists. Like, what are you talking about? Okay, Jesus was a cool rabbi, said some important things, but divine? And so that stretch comes out of this longing, and different people express it and experience it in different ways. So as we pivot to the Buddhist tradition, there is this wonderful story in the Zen Buddhist tradition particularly of a moment when the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, 25 centuries ago in India, one day he gathered his company together, the Zen story goes, and was about to give a Dharma talk, a sermon, as he did constantly his whole 40-year teaching career. But on this day, the story goes, he simply held up a flower and didn't say a word. And I was thinking of doing that today, kid. Just bring a flower in here. You probably want the check back, but just see how awkward it was to spend an hour staring at you, holding a flower. I would never do that because I love to talk, obviously. But only one man signaled with his eyes to the Buddha that he understood what was being said, and that was Kashyapa, who then, when the Buddha died, was chosen as the patriarch that would carry on the tradition. Now, that's a famous story in Zen Buddhism that is later sort of analyzed endlessly, that this is the beginning of the Zen tradition, namely wordless transmission, outside the scriptures, outside of conventional thinking or outside of any kind of thinking, to just simply hold up that flower and in the wordless space have a kind of realization of interconnection. So this story is not only the beginning of the Zen tradition, but really introduces us into a topic in Mahayana Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhist philosophy that is sometimes called in English interdependent origination. Let me see if we can connect these two things together. So in Buddhist metaphysics, all of reality is understood as one continuous, interdependent field of energy, matter, and consciousness, and all of it is imbued with Dharmakaya, which is sometimes translated as Buddha consciousness, Buddha mind. To put it in simpler terms, there is only one reality. All energy, all matter, and all consciousness are emanations of a singular unity, and all of it is sacred. All of it has, well, in our tradition, we would call it Holy Spirit, which is the immanence of God that is present within all things. So in this Buddhist understanding then of the cosmos, everything is one. Everything is interconnected. That term interdependent is so important. I don't exist without you. And everything's existence depends on everything else's existence. This seems like a really powerful orientation to fuel our conversation about our interconnection with the environment and our moral responsibility to care for it. So the other phrase you often hear in Mahayana Buddhism is mutual causation or mutual arising, that every event, everything arises in a dynamic field of mutual causation. So in other words, nothing has a single cause. Everything is causing everything else. That's what makes it difficult to solve problems, by the way. In this political season, I hear there's an election in about 10 days. In this political season, we often wonder, like, well, how do you solve poverty? Imagine really seriously trying to do that. And you realize that what makes this family poor and this family extremely prosperous, when you try to find the single cause for that, you fail. That there are too many causal forces to count. There are structural reasons. I won't even begin to list them. It isn't just, oh, I just need to write this little law and then everything will be okay. And that kind of interferes with our social justice work, our environmental work, because perfection is always and already off the table. But change incrementally can be accomplished. So, and in this Buddhist metaphysical perspective, crucially, there is no hierarchy of being, as is often found in classical Christian theology. In the Middle Ages, and through people like Thomas Aquinas, the metaphysical perspective was that God was in heaven, and then the angels below that, and then men, and then women, and then children, and then, I don't know, dolphins and Labrador retrievers and all the cool animals, bears maybe, and then, simians, and then, fish, and then snails, and then microbes, and then dirt. And that vertical biblical hierarchy shaped European Christian consciousness for centuries. And the environment, despite biblical passages to the contrary, was seen as a commodity that had instrumental value. That is to say, a forest. Oh, look at this forest. Gosh, look at all the board feet of timber I can get out of that. I'll be rich. Or let's, like I was just at Yosemite again. So a crucial plant to the Miwok indigenous peoples who existed in Yosemite Valley, specifically the Awanichi band, a specific species of plant that was crucial to the manufacturing of their baskets and arrows and other crucial technologies and commodities. When the white ranchers came into Yosemite Valley and started grazing cattle, they realized this plant was poisonous to cattle. They destroyed the whole plant in the valley. They tore it all out. They altered the environment because it was preventing them from making money. And the Miwok people now are restoring that particular plant in Yosemite Valley, planting by planting, seed by seed. So what is nature? Is it just our free Costco, our free grocery store for us to get stuff out of to make our lives more comfortable? Or do we, in some East Asian and some indigenous communities, understand that there is no vertical hierarchy? Instead, there's a horizontal mutuality. And many primal cultures view human beings not as the sovereign lords of the earth, given, as Genesis also says, given dominion over the earth, which is I know an English translation of a Hebrew word, but the word dominion means to rule. Kind of like you ruled your little brothers and sisters. They kind of were subordinate to you. It's not that they didn't have value and you were to care for them and protect them, but there's a power hierarchy. And that's also implied in this biblical portrait. And many of the conquest explorers brought that particular medieval European Christian perspective here to the Americas and to everywhere else. And so to me, those are two very different metaphysical philosophies. Are human beings the most important organism to lord over all of the others? Or are human beings one organism among many living in mutual cooperation and morally equal to all of the others? So again, in many primal cultures, they don't see human beings as the top. They see the apex animal, the whale or the eland or the buffalo, the core source of food, as the superior divine animal sent by the Great Mother to feed us in sacrificial death. Human beings are not in charge. So to put it in philosophical terms, this is dualism versus non-dualism, and I want to sort of add that into our vocabulary as we continue on this inquiry. Dualism is the word we associate with Western philosophy, the traditional biblical perspective that God is up here, we are down here. That's eternity, this is temporality. That's formlessness, this is form. That's consciousness, this is the body. So there are two fundamental realities according to this Western view. One that is measurable, the material one, and one that is immeasurable, the mind-body problem, as Descartes called it. So dualism puts us into an orientation with nature that is perhaps problematic because it's just material. And to their eternal discredit, philosophers like Descartes and Kant and others thought animals didn't have any value at all. They were as valuable as plants because they're just purely instinctual. They're just little automatic robots. And now we have very different understandings of animal consciousness and their inherent right to live and so on. So dualism bears fruit, so does non-dualism. In traditions where everything is one, you get a whole different interrelationship with plants, animals, the environment. And so that's how all of this directly impacts our views of nature. And we are still in the Western universe, in the Western world, in many ways, shapes, and forms, most of them unconscious, beholden to this dualistic worldview. And that, I think, is what is growing in us. You never used to hear Christians talk about stewardship of the environment. But in the last 40 years or so, this has become a forefront conversation in many, many Christian communities. So for me, this is an opportunity for growth in our Christian communities. Not to abandon maybe dualism or non-dualism because, again, ultimate reality is beyond all concepts anyway. So I argue about conceptual frameworks. But my more practical question is, where does that conceptual framework get you? What are the outcomes of that worldview? Right? That's the practical question I'm more interested in. So I think a lot about Thich Nhat Hanh. Many of you know who he is, and I've had some wonderful experiences with some of his devotees and people ordained in his lineage. He passed away just recently, a couple years ago. A very famous Vietnamese Zen Buddhist teacher. As a very young man, he left Vietnam and came to America, taught some world religions classes at Columbia, started hanging out with Martin Luther King and Thomas Merton and all those cool cats. And he, in his Zen Buddhist tradition, changed Zen Buddhism forever too. Because he said, as Buddhist monks, we can't just stay in the monastery. And so we have a new word now for his work, engaged Buddhism. Buddhism that is intentionally committed to social justice and political activism. It started with his anti-war efforts. It became very difficult for him to get a visa to the United States. He was so vocally anti-Vietnam War. So he ended up losing his right to live here and establishing his main center in France, Plum Village in France. And he had a center, as many of you know, the Deer Park Monastery in Escondido, in Valley Center, actually. So he often used the word interbeing instead of being, sort of a perfect Buddhist thing to say when he was talking about the nature of reality. Again, going back over what we were just discussing, interdependent origination and mutual arising. So he said, nothing has being, everything has interbeing. And that may seem like a small semantic matter to you, but it actually shifts the thinking. It's practices like that. It's practices like relanguaging the world that really help move us in, I think, a really important direction. So this non-dualistic perspective, by the way, is also reflected in many Native American or indigenous American languages. Now, I'm no scholar about these things, but I read an article. And I want to share that with you. It was about the Navajo, or as they call themselves, the Diné, which means the people. It's an interesting thing to learn about Native Americans. Most of them call themselves the human beings. the people. And most of these names that we call them by are not names they have ever heard of in their life. So the Navajo, let's just go with that one. They have a language composed almost entirely of verbs instead of nouns. Now, when I first read this, I'm like, that's crazy. You can't have a tree or a rock or a deer or a cactus or a man or a woman or a sky or water. Those are all nouns, right? English is absolutely wedded to nouns. A noun is a person, place, or thing. Sorry, taking you back to junior high here. Grade school stuff, right? Let's talk about this, though, because when you language reality as a set of scattered, disconnected, separate nouns, like when I say the word tree, y'all know instantly what I mean. But are you thinking about a living organism in a particular piece of land? No, you're thinking about an abstraction, a concept in your head called tree. And in that giant room, there are petrified trees and Christmas trees and apple trees and money trees at weddings and all kinds of trees, Joshua trees, family trees. I mean, it's a mess, right? It's a bunch of things that aren't even really connected, and they certainly don't refer to a specific living organism. Imagine a language composed of verbs, that everything, when you are born into the Diné culture, you learn the Diné language. You learn that nothing exists separately from anything else, and nothing exists as a frozen moment. What do you want to do? What moment of tree do you want to freeze? The seed, the sapling, the short tree, the giant 300-year-old tree, the dead tree, the decomposing tree, nourishing the new seedlings? I mean, which moment in that circle are you freezing with this abstraction, this noun of tree? The Navajo will call it treeing. They'll call water watering. They'll call rain raining. Everything gets named as a phenomenal movement, as a fluidity. Deeply dependent, interdependent on all other fluidity. So the whole world shifts. And that's a fascinating question in philosophy. How you view the world depends on how you language the world. When you're hiking with a friend and you come upon a bend in the creek, a bend in the river, and the water is whirlpooling, you know what I'm talking about, right? That funnel where the water's spinning in a circle and it's sucking leaves down into it. It's really cool. And you say to your friend, hey, help me pick this up. I want to take this home, put it in my truck, put it in my garden. It'll be a really great water feature. And your friend looks at you and you quickly realize that you can't do that because a whirlpool has no existence apart from the river. Let me say it differently. The whirlpool is something that the river is doing. It's an event, not a thing. I think we all understand this. And in fact, let's shift into the Navajo way of talking about it. Shouldn't we call it a whirlpooling? And the whirlpooling is something that the rivering is doing. And the rivering is something that the streamings are doing. And the streamings are something that the raining is doing. And the raining is something that the clouding is doing. Are you with me? I'm going to keep going. And the clouding is something that the oceaning is doing. And the oceaning is something that the rivering is doing. That's what the water circulation system on the planet really is. It's interdependent, interbeing, mutually arising. Our own experience, when you reframe it for a few minutes as we are now, our own experience affirms this non-dualistic fluidity. Thich Nhat Hanh would often hold up a flower or a piece of paper. You can find millions of YouTube videos of him doing this. He would hold up a flower or a piece of paper, whatever was handy, and talk about the cloud in the flower or the paper, and the rain or the sun. That when you hold up a piece of paper, you are really holding up the lumberjack who cut down the tree, and the gasoline in her chainsaw, and the people who built Interstate 5 so it could get all the way from Oregon down to here. That piece of paper is the entire universe masquerading as a piece of paper. What if I view every human being that way? What if I view every natural phenomenon that way, as the entire cosmos embodied fleetingly and heartbreakingly and beautifully in this one moment? But this moment has no separation from all of the other moments. I'm pitching non-dualism as hard as I can. How's it going? Yeah, okay. No, don't applaud. Because it's hard to get a hold of, because we're so acculturated into a dualistic, materialistic, atomistic view where everything's separate. So seeing all things as deeply interdependent with all other things, I think that's a beautiful perspective to bring into our work in Christian communities. And it would be a beautiful second talk growing out of this one to go through Christian scripture and find, and there are many moments, and Hebrew scripture for that matter, where there are curious hints of this kind of oneness energy. You know, when Jesus says, I am the vine and you are the branches. Vines and branches are a unity. When Jesus says, you know, I am one with the Father and the Father is one with me and I am one with you. That's pretty Buddhist. So that's a fun thing to do. Joseph Campbell asked this question of Bill Moyers in one of those The Power of Myth videos. He said, Bill Moyers asked him, what is the meaning of life? And Campbell shoots back, what is the meaning of a flower? It doesn't have meaning, it just is. It just exists. And in that Buddhist sense, then, the meaning of a flower, it's the wrong question. The mind isn't looking for meaning, Campbell says. The mind is looking for an experience of connection. And as we've been thinking about the Buddha's flower sermon and Thich Nhat Hanh's sermons, when you look at a beautiful lotus flower like this, you are looking at the entire cosmos. And a lot of you know this already. We have one of our presidential candidates, Kamala Harris. You know that she's her mother's Indian. And so you know the word Kamala means lotus. And Kamala's middle name is Devi, Kamala D. Harris. And Devi means goddess in Hinduism. So we have a presidential candidate right now called the Lotus Goddess. I just think that's politically interesting. So there's so many pieces. I've really had a heck of a time shoehorning all of this in, but to drop a little German on you. I took German after I graduated from UC Santa Barbara. I was thinking about entering a PhD program in religious studies, and one of the things you do in a PhD program is you become fluent in either German or French in religious studies, because so much scholarship is written in German and in French. Like that. Well, French is hard. I'll try German because my parents are Dutch, so maybe I have a genetic edge there. And I lasted about 3 weeks. But let me see if I can pronounce this quote from Goethe. Alles vergänglich ist nur ein Gleichnis. Gleichnis. Sorry, I botched that. Let me try that. This is the most important part of the whole talk. No, I'm committed to getting this closer to right. Alles vergänglich ist nur ein Gleichnis. It means everything transitory is a metaphor. Or all that is fleeting is an analogy, a likeness, a simile, or a parable for the sacred formless depth hidden from us by the surface world of objects. I fell deep into a rabbit hole on Reddit where German people were arguing how to translate Gleichnis in English, and there's a vicious battle. Is it parable, or is it metaphor, or is it simile? And I don't know, so I just put them all on there. Now, look at what Goethe, this wonderful poet and philosopher in the German tradition, sort of the German Shakespeare, right? But really much more. And Goethe's idea here is that everything that is the foreground, all of these beautiful forms that are arising and fading, stand as a sign or a symbol or a metaphor for the background. And the background is that changeless sacred realm. I'm thinking right away of Plato's Forms, because Goethe would have understood, everybody was reading Plato a lot in the 18th century and 19th century. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato argued that there are these eternal, changeless forms, eidos in Greek, meaning patterns upon which everything down here in the material world is based. So there's a perfect form of goodness in the Platonic realm of forms, Plato argued. And so all examples of goodness down here are kind of based on that. There's a form for justice. There's a form for beauty. In other words, Plato was trying to wrestle with the fact, what's guiding all of this evolution as forms come into being and go out of being? It's a kind of universal archetypal idea that there is a foreground that you and I see and hear and taste and touch and smell, but the foreground hides from us the background. And the background is the sacred reality that is the cause of and that is superior to the foreground. So that leads Goethe to put it this way, that everything you see, every face, every flower, every beautiful moonrise, is a fleeting, I'll use a modern analogy, it's like a movie being projected on a screen. But the projector is hidden from you. There's something real that's giving rise to that. Carl Jung comes along later and calls this the supreme being archetype, that everywhere you go in the world, in all mythologies and religions, you find this single universal idea that the visible foreground is a veil that hides from us the invisible background. And the invisible background is superior to and is the source of the visible background. And then in different cultures, they'll conceptualize that background in different ways. We have inherited a tradition here where we call that God the Father. In Taoism, it's called Tao, a completely impersonal, non-local, conscious intelligence that animates everything unintentionally. So different tradition, and then in Hinduism, it's personified as thousands of gods and goddesses. And Joseph Campbell then brings that into his analysis of theology. He said all of our God ideas, our concepts of God, he calls them masks of eternity. We make the mask and we hang it on the mystery. And behind that is the reality that we're actually interested in connecting with. Remember, religio? But since it can't be seen or understood or conceptualized or spoken of, we artistically create images and concepts to kind of hang on the mystery. And that's God. Our God's a male God. Oh, you guys have a goddess. That's interesting. Or, you have tens of thousands of gods. Or you don't personify at all. You call it the force. All of those are masks. And Campbell's point is it really doesn't matter what concepts we hang on the mystery. We're all talking about the same fundamental sacred source beyond all masks, beyond all metaphors, beyond all images, and beyond all concepts. And in fact, ultimately, we must, in our spiritual growth, leave behind even the mask. The mask kind of shows us where to look, but the way Campbell puts it is, in the end, our masks for God become the final obstacle. That we must go beyond them. That's why so many of us are just instinctually drawn to comparative religion. We want to learn, how do Muslims do it? What's going on in Hinduism, Shinto, and in Native American spirituality? We recognize the universal nature of all religious longing and have long ago abandoned the tired, and I would say editorializingly, childish debate about which religion is the right one. We're just arguing over which mask is better looking or something. And when we're arguing about God, we're never talking about God, we're arguing about our ideas. And the challenge of confronting fundamentalism is the challenge and the realization that maybe these people aren't worshiping God, maybe they're worshiping their idea of God. And is that a violation of the second commandment? Is that idolatry? When you are worshiping your own ideas. And so that is a powerful possibility. And when we apprehend nature or the world or each other with the proper preparation and attitude, literally everything becomes the portal through which we might experience divinity. And so I'm not talking a lot today about specific reasons why nature matters and why nature must be preserved, but I hope by looking through these other windows into the same house, we're sort of concluding on our own that whether I am standing in Yosemite Valley or in my backyard, I have the possibility of apprehending the eternal. And by the way, you can do it inside your house too, or anywhere that you can possibly imagine. The frozen food aisle at Costco. I'm going to tell you a little story for a second. I love to cook. My wife and I love to cook, and I love to shop. I've always loved grocery stores. I was the youngest of 3 boys, and my 2 older brothers were 8 and 10 years older. So I was kind of a mama's boy. When you're 8, you're not hanging out with your 18-year-old brother, right? You know what I mean? He's driving around town with his girlfriend, and I'm 8. So I would often just be at my mom's side. I was in the kitchen learning how to chop celery and going to the grocery store and figuring out what's the difference between cilantro and parsley. And that all served me beautifully later, because when I was 16, I got a job at the neighborhood grocery store in Ventura, Vaughn's, where I ended up working for the next 22 years in different cities. I transferred to Santa Barbara to go to college. Then I transferred to San Diego to go to grad school, always working in the produce department at Vaughn's. I still have work dreams. Just the other night, I had a whole crazy dream about not trimming celery fast enough, and my boss was mad at me. So I have produce departments like in my blood, and I loved working in the produce department because you're just so in touch with the fruits of the earth. Oh, here come the pumpkins. It's October. Oh, here come the Christmas trees. And then in the spring, those early stone fruits, the apricots, and it just put me in touch with something, and getting to talk to people about the food they were making, and it was wonderful. So to this day, I love grocery shopping. I'm the guy that has, 3 different lists in my phone, one for Costco, one for Trader Joe's, and one for my neighborhood grocery store. I'm into it. So last year, preparing for Thanksgiving, I'm on a Costco run, and I'm going through the frozen food aisle. And it wasn't like this. It was super crowded. And people were talking, and there was a lot of jostling, and there's all these gosh darn sample people blocking up. And then everybody parks their 12 carts around the sample station, and you're trying to get by. And you need to put on your gracious human being language to go into a Costco, because it's going to be a little tough. And I'm in there, and I'm paused because I'm stuck behind 4 people who are all trying to get to the frozen meatballs or whatever. And I just paused for a second. And there's a guy with a Bluetooth talking at the top of his lungs on a phone call. He's like, is he talking to me? All that. No, he's making a call. And I paused, and I can't explain why this happened. But I had this sudden kind of shift, and I kind of receded, and I saw it all as an achingly beautiful moment. All of these families preparing their ritual gratitude festival meals and moving through all of our kind of muddled, imperfect lives with all of our moods and all of our financial challenges and all of our worries and the cancer diagnoses and the baby that is screaming and the young couple that's all cuddled up. They look like they're on their honeymoon in Costco. And the whole milieu, the whole pastiche, the whole display of human magnificence, it just broke my heart. I actually shed a tear. I got chills. Right now, the hair on my arms is standing up, remembering this holy moment in a warehouse store. And then I thought about it later, and I thought, this is what the Celtic tradition calls a thin place. Have you ever encountered that phrase when you travel in Iceland or in Scotland or Ireland or the northern England? You run across this beautiful Celtic tradition, very mystical, very spiritual. They call them thin places. And a thin place in Celtic spirituality is where the barrier between the sacred and the profane grows so diaphanous, so porous, that something of the sacred comes through, shimmers to the surface. And yes, it happens in Yosemite Valley like constantly, but it can happen in the La Mesa Costco on Fletcher Park Boulevard. If you are in the right space, right? You're the one that either is available to this or you're not. What if we are always in a thin place, but we don't have our radio receivers tuned to the right channel? Because I'm busy and I'm caught up and I'm thinking. So this is what Joseph Campbell calls the supernatural aid in his classic book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and he outlines 17 stages of the hero's journey. And each of us is the hero of our own lives, of course. This isn't about, Frodo or Parsifal or whatever. This is about us answering the call, leaving the known world, going through ordeals, the death of the ego, making peace or atonement with power, the attainment of the prize, the boon, and then the return with that prize back home to where you started, only now you're changed, you're empowered, and you're committed to healing the world. You're in service. And so, according to Campbell, the archetype of the hero's journey is found throughout every religion, every mythology, every culture, across all borders, temporal and geographical. And Campbell calls the third stage the supernatural aid. And that's what I want to think about with you in terms of nature. Again, just as another cultural touchstone here. After you, the hero, have said the holy word yes and answered the call, you are met with unexpected support. Now, in the classic, hero's journey tales, it's like a wizard or an invisibility cloak for Harry Potter or a magic potion or a special power. But in real life, all of these are, of course, as Goethe argued, metaphors for how this cosmic support actually shows up. Here's how Campbell writes about it in that chapter. He says that protective power is always and ever present within the sanctuary of the heart, and even imminent within or just behind the unfamiliar features of the world. One has only to know and trust, and ageless guardians will appear. Having responded to his or her own call and continuing to follow courageously as the consequences unfold, the hero finds all the forces of the unconscious at their side. Mother Nature herself supports the mighty task. So in the hero's journey stories, it might be like a magic potion, but in real life, when we say yes to the call and have the courage to step into the unknown, it's as if all of nature supports us. It's as if that commitment triggers grace, as we might say in the Christian tradition. Think of all these biblical examples, how Moses and the Israelites fleeing Egypt were fed by manna from heaven. Think of the Hanukkah oil story of enough oil for one night lasts eight nights. Think of Jesus and the loaves and the fishes. I love reading theological fundamentalist explanations of this. Like, it's either God mystically reproduced 1,000 fish out of 2, or, somebody pulled out some food and then everybody else kind of reached in their bag and pulled out their lunches too, and then suddenly everybody had food. It's some materialistic, mechanical explanation. I prefer, this is my own personal take, I prefer to leave it in the realm of the metaphorical. That when the need arises, the abundance appears. And it's a pedagogical story about Campbell's point, that when you ask, you will receive. That we don't get everything we want, but we have a pretty good shot at getting everything we need. And in my favorite gospel, Matthew, of course, Jesus has this line, when you put first the kingdom of God, all else will be given to you. And that's in the Sermon on the Mount, right, where he's talking about all of those issues. So I'm struck by this, that the unlocking trigger is my consciousness, which we could call faith or hope or trust and willingness to risk. That's what opens up this infinite abundance. And we notice when we compare Christianity and Buddhism that in the hero's journey narratives of both of these figures, we find all these parallels, right? They both had miraculous births. They both answered the call, which was born out of a keen awareness of the suffering of the world. They both experienced, as they were about to cross the threshold, they experienced what Joseph Campbell calls threshold guardians. They were met by a demon who blocked the way, and they had to answer 3 questions. It's a remarkable trope. The Buddha story is 500 years older than the Jesus story. Nobody's arguing that it's plagiarism, but this is how mythology works, right? This is how Scripture works. This is a literary trope. It's the 3 questions, the 3 riddles trope. And our hero must pass the test before they are granted access to the higher level. So both of these stories align, and in both stories, at the moment of crisis, of ego death, after the initiation, they flee into the wilderness. They go away. In both traditions, wilderness becomes both a lived reality and a metaphor for standing aside from the machinations of human society and preoccupied as it is with all the things that we're always doing, and to go into this vast, quiet place beyond words, beyond concepts, beyond ideas, beyond all the human constructions and conventions and systems. This is why we get closer to God when we go into the woods. And so the desert fathers and mothers, of course, exhibit that same thing. I'm talking about, of course, very early Christianity. In the first 200 years, is sort of the first thing that happened, right? Especially out of Egypt. St. Anthony and others began to sort of invent the monastic life. Let's go away from the world and strip ourselves of all of our support systems and align more deeply with the primal sacred that we are. So as we get ready to wrap up here, I'm thinking about the great Islamic poet, Sufi poet, Rumi, and his wonderful poem, The Great Wagon. A lot of you know this by heart, too. Just one small fragment from the poem, he writes, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. So this is the mystical vision of our primal connection with that which is real. Call it Allah or whatever you want to call it. But it's out beyond all of our constructions, all of our conceptual constructions. And when we meet there in interrelationship, everything that is trivial about our lives falls away. The great Jewish mystic and philosopher and friend of Abraham Joshua Heschel, where we started, Martin Buber, in his most important book called I and Thou, talks about the way we relate to nature. Do we see nature in an I-it relationship or I-thou relationship? In an I-it relationship, everything's just an object. But in an I-thou relationship, everything we meet is sacred. We view the entire world as reverent. And my last night in Yosemite, we were staying at Evergreen Lodge in these beautiful little cabins on the north side, just outside the park. And I was walking home from the dining room to my cabin. Lori had stayed in the cabin because we hiked too much that day. And I'm walking through the dark, and I didn't bring my flashlight. It was pitch dark, and I saw something scurry in front of me across the road. And I live in San Carlos. We see coyotes every day. So do you in your neighborhoods. But I'd never seen a fox before. And this thing goes across the road, and it's dog-like, but it's about this tall with this insanely bushy tail. And I realize, I pull out my phone, turn on my flashlight. I'm like, sorry, sir, or ma'am, I'm going to light you up. And she turned to me and stopped. And then she jumped on a log and turned and looked back at me. And I turned my flashlight off and took the worst picture I've ever taken. Because, again, it was pitch black, and I had to figure out how to turn my flash on. Like, I don't even know if she's still there, but because it's black. The night is black. It's coal. And I took this flash picture, and there she is with her gleaming eyes. And when you encounter the wild like that, I mean, we had a moment. I don't know if she had a moment. I had a moment. She's probably like, oh, what the hell? I'm trying to be invisible. Some jerk found me. But I had this moment of seeing this beautiful, kind of sexy apex predator. She's just gorgeous. And if you ever heard foxes make noise, it's the weirdest thing. But again, you get that chilling sense that the world around us is conscious, all of it. Not just fox, but trees and rocks and ancient and the ancestors. And in Judaism, this idea that we should then participate in the healing of the world. How could we not participate in Tikkun Olam? That's the gift God gives us. That's the dharma or the purpose, to share in the sacred work of trying to heal the world, even if it's just picking up one little piece of trash. So what I have not given you, I have disappointed some of you. I've not given you any specific policy suggestions. I've not given you any encyclopedic information about how each of the world's metaphysical, spiritual, philosophical, religious, and mythological traditions are concretely addressing our current climate change crisis. But I am convinced, and this is what I've been trying to do with you, that right action arises on its own when right understanding and right mindfulness are present and activated. We will know what to do when we understand better who we are. That great Maya Angelou line. When we know better, we will do better. And as Ramana Maharshi put it, the greatest gift you can give to world peace is to show up awake. That our spiritual evolution is our contribution to the healing of the world. It isn't one or the other. And when we deeply rest in the question instead of rushing off into answers, I think we find ourselves guided by Holy Spirit or Dharmakaya, whatever you'd like to call it. And there is no one path because everything is causing everything else. And instead, as individuals and as intentional groups like this, we take steps toward healing, toward understanding, toward cooperation with the natural forces that sustain us all. This Latin phrase comes to mind finally for our last slide. It means it is solved by walking. That we may not have all of the answers or all of the policy solutions, or we may feel ourselves paralyzed by complexity. That as environmentalists, we drive gasoline cars to our environmental meetings. And this is just the way it is. We're never going to escape the absurdities and contradictions inherent in existing as embodied creatures in the formless, sacred universe in which we find ourselves. But maybe that by walking in the right direction, solutions begin to arise. That's what I carry with me, hopefully. I know that I can't figure this all out or solve this, but I know that if I move together with you in certain intentional directions, things get a little bit better. Thank you, my friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. I have a confession. I came in this morning. People asked me, how are you doing? I said, I'm running around putting out fires. I'm putting out fires right and left. I told several of you that. Peter has brought me to Rumi's fields of grass. And I find myself at a thin place. Thank you so much. This has been a blessing. We're going to collect now all your questions, and we'll present them to Peter. And also, we'll be passing around the hat. So if you want to give us any donations, or if you want to see me later about how to do a sponsorship, I would love that. So we've got some questions to start. Any other questions? Okay, can we get started, Limby, with what you have?
So someone wants to know, what are the 3 riddles or questions?
Start that over.
Okay.
The mic was on.
Hi. Someone asked, what are the 3 riddles or questions?
What are the 3 riddles or questions? What's that in reference to? Who wrote that question? I don't understand.
I think it was when you talked about Jesus and having 3, the 3 obstacles.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, sorry. Yes, thank you. No, going back to the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and the Jesus story 500 years later, both of them, we are told, are met by a demon who gives them 3 riddles, or in this case, three temptations, in fact, in this case. And so the Buddha story is almost exactly like the Christian story. We recall Satan says to Jesus, he whisks Jesus to the top of a mountain and says, "Look at all these nations, I will make you king of all that you survey if you bow down to me." And that temptation is identical to one of the 3 temptations in the demon story of Siddhartha, who is met by the demon Mara, who says the same thing. If you stop this quest for enlightenment, I'll make you king of the whole world. And in both cases, Jesus and Buddha say, "No, thank you. I don't want political power." So the specific temptations vary a little bit, but I think the theme is exactly the same.
Yeah. Okay, this is a observation
Sure.
from me. Every time I learn more about the spiritual world, I keep thinking of quantum mechanics
Okay.
and the, quantum entanglement, and how there's only, this electron here makes this electron over here do something, and it seems very similar to me. Am I completely off the mark?
No, and I'm no physicist, but again, I read an article. But no, there's a great book that a lot of us read back in the 70s. It's still around, called The Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra. He was at Berkeley, and it's explicitly on this question: how do the cutting edge discoveries happening in physics in the 20th and now 21st century, how do they affirm or align with some of these ancient spiritual insights from mostly Asian traditions, in that case, Taoism, Hinduism, Buddhism?
Oh, you said it so much better than I did.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. So in quantum physics and entanglement, we noticed in experiments that mirror that things happen across distance and across time. There seems to be a connection that we can't really physically see or measure between things. And so what if these ancient, this is where I go with it, and maybe you would agree, what if these ancient spiritual ideas are our fumbling attempt to kind of talk about what science has now worked its way into understanding as well? What if that's what the Trinitarian Christian doctrine of the Holy Spirit means? And for me, because I'm very comfortable working with poetry and metaphor, to me, they're just 2 different ways of talking about the same thing. That's my own thought on that, and I think you're leaning that way.
I think I am,
Yeah, why not?
Well, someone asked, how can we watch this program again online? And I think it's on YouTube. Yes, so go to YouTube and you
Go
can
to First
see it.
United Methodist
It's church.
channel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I can go through it and correct myself.
Is the Jewish idea of the original explosion of energy entering all creation a part of the non-dual?
Oh, gosh, I'm not as familiar with that particular Jewish origin story. That's a constant question, though, about thinking. I wonder what that is. Sounds like someone's tearing a book apart back there somewhere. Okay. So this carry on, by the way. But I was just suddenly curious about that. Seeing if a book was missing from my pile there, but there are. I made a lot of hay today with y'all about dualism versus non-dualism. And maybe that's one way I can respond to this question. I don't want to create a hard binary between dualism and non-dualism, because in countless examples throughout Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah tradition in particular, and between and within Christian mysticism, and we heard some Sufi Islam mysticism with Rumi, there is the explicit theme of non-duality. That whatever we call God is actually a reality in which we are participating. And you can point to all those passages in Psalms and Proverbs, and there's all kinds of little clues of non-duality sprinkled through, including in Jewish senses of what God is. I love how Judaism doesn't really try to define God. God is simply the mystery of mysteries. And I'm really comfortable with that, if that matters, but because I really feel the less we say, the closer to the truth we get. And so that's my response to this kind of idea that, yes, there may be many moments in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic belief that align more than we suspect with the classically non-dualistic traditions of Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism.
This is another comment on dualism. I learned dualism is right, wrong, good, bad, up, down, and that dualism replaces God by judging the value of everything. How does the native tradition see this?
Wonderful. Yeah, once you posit a dualistic metaphysical system, it has enormous ethical implications. That then we start to see everything through a kind of binary lens, good versus evil. So I'm thinking of Buddhism, this word called upaya, which is usually translated as skillful means. And there's a classic story, I think it's in the Heart Sutra, and I'm getting this wrong, Diamond Sutra. I forget where it is.
None of us will know.
Yeah. Well, somebody's going to Google this when they watch this and write a nasty YouTube comment about what an idiot I am. But so I should just leave the specific reference out. There's this ancient sort of Buddhist Chinese story about a father who has 3 very young children. And they're in a house, and the house catches on fire, and he's got to figure out a way to get his kids out of the house. And so he knows that they're sleepy and they're not going to move if he tells them to get outside the house. So he says, and I'll update the story, he says, hey, the Amazon driver just dropped all your Christmas presents on the front porch. Y'all come out and see what they are. And they all go running out of the house. And the story makes this point that lying to your children, which is obviously bad, lying is bad, right? But in this case, it was the most skillful way to save his children's lives. And so that takes us into a very interesting ethical consideration. How many times have you and I found it necessary to nuance our way between 2 ideals, practicing non-deception and saving someone from suffering? And when you're trying to save someone from suffering, sometimes you hold a little bit back of the story that you're about to tell or the opinion you're about to bark out. And so is that deception or is that compassion? And it has to be one or the other. And I love this Buddhist idea because it says, you know what? Let's not work with binaries. We're all muddling through. Let's find the path that causes the least harm. And that's the skillful means that does not authorize all lying, but in specific contexts gives us a little room to get out of the binary grip.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Anybody?
Hi, my name is Catherine. I don't have a card. Well, can I just talk?
Yeah, you need to bring your mic with you, and then well, of course you can just talk. But hold on a sec so the folks at home can hear you. We're going to bring you a microphone. This gives you a chance to rewrite your whole question now.
Well,
Hi.
because Kay mentioned that there's no room in the budget for stewardship of the earth, and on that subject, I would just like to challenge the leadership and the people that feel really fervent about this whole mess we're in, to say what is stewardship of the earth and maybe balance it with going out the world and trying to have them be better Christians or whatever, and how to expand how to be a better Christian. Because we're running out of time.
Right.
And we need to model for the young people that we see a huge urgency.
Right.
And however we can manifest that, but it's just hard. We're addicted to our devices. You know, every time you take a walk, people are not looking at nature. They're on the phone.
Yeah.
So hopefully our church will start to get on board with everything you've been talking about, and I applaud your conversation was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think a lot of, yeah, we can give some applause for that. Well, churches, our communities, I don't represent or speak in any way, shape, or form for First United Methodist, but religious communities are, you know, the key word there is community, and voices and urgencies and agendas. Have a conversation or continue to have that discussion with leadership here about future programs and commitments. It's my, I don't, again, have any knowledge about this, but it's my experience that churches are not wealthy institutions that can fund specific programs. That has to come from you and all of you, and to decide what you want to do and how you want to gather the resources and how you want to commit those resources. This is an educational endeavor run by volunteers, and we are here to think through these things together. And now it's your turn. You know, we're getting together for an hour and a half on a Saturday, but we all have the rest of our lives to decide what actions we believe are going to, you know, salvator ambulando. what steps we're going to take now to, in small ways and in more organized or larger ways, take those kinds of concrete actions. You know, I do my little things, and y'all do too. So that's I guess what we can do right now.
Thank you. I just want to ask you to please fill out the evaluation forms.
Thank you so much, Peter. We are grateful for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
This has been a joy. In fact, Mr. John Castro asked me a little earlier, shouldn't we have something that would decrease anxiety for the election time and so forth? And I'm thinking this might be helpful for election anxiety too. Anyway, I wanted to respond to your question and just emphasize what Peter did. We're just volunteers here. We can't be prescriptive about what people should or should not do. We can give intellectually vigorous presentations with people who inspire us. And that's why we ask on the evaluation sheet, question number 7, please indicate any things we could, no, that's not the one. What one change would you apply to your life as a result of today's program? We only asked for one. I bet you could think of a lot of them, maybe 2, maybe 10. And it can go on for the rest of the day as you think of those things that you can do in your life, in your place in the world, with your background, resources, whatever. Think of things you can do. Every little thing counts. It doesn't have to go to a mountaintop. It can be in your living room or your backyard, whatever. Thank you all so much. Can anybody tell me if the coffee's made yet? Okay, let's have some lunch and enjoy our time together. Thank you. Oh, one other thing. Peter's got his books here. Also, he is very generous to say that if you want his information from this lecture, you can go to peterboland.com and just ask him for it, and he'll send it to you. And I've had him do this before, and it's Boland with 2 L's. So thank you all. Let's have lunch and have a good time. Okay.